Harvard black girl wrongfully dragged to court by cops. Then the U.S. Marshals turned the tables. Unbelievable. How could this happen to someone like her? Maya Brooks was living her dream. Harvard student, future leader, a young woman determined to make a difference. But one cold February night, that dream turned into a nightmare. A false accusation, handcuffs, a system that refused to listen. What started as a simple grocery run spiraled into a fight for justice against forces far more powerful than she ever imagined. But here's the twist. Her arrest wasn't just a mistake. It was something far more sinister. Stay with us, because this story will leave you speechless. And before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss how this unfolds. Maya Brooks had always been told that success was about breaking boundaries. And on the day she received her acceptance letter from Harvard University, she felt those words come to life. Growing up in a tight-knit middle-class community in Atlanta, Georgia, Maya had witnessed both her parents work tirelessly to give her the best opportunities they could. Her mother was a nurse at a bustling hospital near the city's downtown, and her father was a small business owner who ran a local convenience store that had been passed down for generations. Their sacrifices fueled her ambitions, and the moment she read, "We are delighted to inform you that you have been admitted to Harvard University," tears streamed down her face. This was it, the first major step in a journey she hoped would break generational barriers and set a shining example for every young person of color with big dreams. When she arrived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, for the start of her freshman year, Maya felt a sense of awe. Strolling under the shadow of the John Harvard statue, she couldn't help but snap a selfie to capture her disbelief. She had read countless articles on Harvard's rich history, the brilliance of its faculty, and the achievements of its alumni. But seeing the famous Widener Library for the first time, with its towering columns, made her heart flutter with excitement. Here she was, among the best and brightest, about to begin her journey as a government major. She harbored dreams of one day entering public service, perhaps even working her way up to the Senate, where she could craft legislation that addressed the systemic issues she had seen in her own community. Her dorm was in Thayer Hall, close to the hustle and bustle of Harvard Yard. As Maya dragged her suitcase along the cobblestones, other new students milled about, some already wearing Harvard sweatshirts, others scanning campus maps and building schedules. Over the next few weeks, life fell into a welcome routine. She bonded with her roommates, Lauren, a wide-eyed Californian, and Priya, an aspiring journalist from New Jersey, and discovered that she loved the intellectual fervor of each class. Her professors pushed her to question everything, to go beyond the surface of political discourse and examine the core structures shaping American life. Late-night study sessions were balanced by occasional forays into Harvard Square's cafes, where students swapped stories and debated the hot topics until closing time. Yet, despite the elation, Maya felt the weight of being one of the few black women in many of her classes. Harvard boasted diversity, but in some advanced seminars, she sometimes found herself the only African-American student. She could sense the subtle shift in tone or the occasional well-meaning but misguided questions from peers who believed her experience could represent all black Americans. She was used to being the only one in certain rooms, but it didn't make the feeling any less isolating. With quiet resilience, she accepted it, determined to thrive regardless. She threw herself into her studies, reading everything from the Federalist Papers to modern analyses on civil rights legislation. She joined the Black Students Association, found mentorship with upperclassmen who had navigated similar waters, and even wrote an op-ed for the Harvard Crimson, Harvard's real and renowned student newspaper, about minority representation in government. As the semester progressed, Maya discovered that ambition and pressure sometimes collided. She had nights where she was up until dawn, buried in books, analyzing court cases for her constitutional law seminar, and she had days where she had to pass up social events to juggle her extracurriculars. Despite these challenges, her optimism never waned. She believed in the system, believed that justice, fairness, and equality could be achieved if people of good conscience worked hard enough to fix its flaws. She found a part-time job in the campus library system to help cover her expenses. Every Wednesday, she worked at Widener Library's front desk, guiding tourists and scholars to the right reading rooms. On Fridays, she helped catalog new research materials in the sub-basement. where only authorized staff could roam among the musty shelves. The quiet depths of Widener felt almost holy, a sanctuary of knowledge that reminded her how many had come before her and how many footsteps she would leave for others to follow. It started on a cold February evening in Cambridge. Maya, now in her junior year, had just finished a marathon study session at Lamont Library with her project partner, Marcus Jordan. They were preparing for a moot court competition that encompassed constitutional rights, specifically the Fourth Amendment's protection against unlawful searches and seizures. Both were exhausted from hours of drafting arguments and analyzing precedents. Marcus headed back to his dorm while Maya decided to grab groceries at a 24-hour store a few blocks away before returning to her off-campus apartment in Cambridgeport. Outside, the wind was sharp and biting. Maya drew her coat tighter around her and walked with brisk purpose. Snow flurries caught in the street lights, drifting like miniature spirits in the winter air. Cambridge's old buildings seemed to loom with a serene solemnity. The roads were quiet at this hour, the sidewalks mostly empty. Her mind drifted, replaying the moot court arguments in her head. The difference between probable cause and reasonable suspicion, the significance of the exclusionary rule, and how landmark cases like Map v. Ohio shaped modern policing. Ironically, these legal nuances were about to become central in her life in a way she could never have anticipated. When she reached the grocery store, she grabbed a few staples: milk, eggs, bread, some microwave meals. She quickly checked out, paid for her items, and thanked the cashier with a friendly smile. Tucking the bags under her arm, she stepped back outside, now facing a brisk 10-minute walk to her apartment. It was near midnight, but she felt safe. Cambridge, for all its urban complexities, was a place she had grown comfortable navigating. The street lights illuminated her path, and she even hummed a quiet tune to herself to stave off the lingering chill. A police car appeared in her peripheral vision, rolling slowly down the street. She noticed it primarily because it drove at a snail's pace, as if deliberately searching for something or someone. A vague discomfort pricked at her senses. She had done nothing wrong, but she was aware of stories friends from other colleges, acquaintances back home, had recounted tense encounters with the police. She hoped this would be nothing more than a patrol car finishing its route. Suddenly, the patrol car accelerated and then pulled over right by the curb where she walked. The siren blared, a short, jarring wail that caused her to jump. A booming voice called out from the loudspeaker, "Stop right there. Put your bags down." Confused and alarmed, Maya obeyed. She set her grocery bags down on the sidewalk, raising her hands slightly to show she wasn't holding anything threatening. Her heart thumped against her rib cage. Two officers stepped out. The older one was tall and heavy-set, with gray hair and a hardened face that revealed decades of police work. The other was younger, leaner, his posture stiff with vigilance. "What's the problem, officer?" Maya asked, her voice measured. They exchanged a glance. The older officer's nameplate read R. Donovan, and the younger, T. Callahan. Donovan strode forward, his hand poised over his holster. "We got a report matching your description. Woman seen in the area, possibly carrying a weapon." Maya's eyes went wide in disbelief. "A weapon? I only have groceries." Callahan chimed in. "Where are you coming from? What are you doing out at this hour?" She gestured to her grocery bags on the sidewalk. "I was studying at Lamont, then went to pick up groceries. I'm just heading to my apartment." Donovan's eyes narrowed as he swept his gaze over her. "Mind if we search you?" Maya took a calming breath, recollecting her knowledge of the law. "Officers, I know my rights. I don't consent to a search without probable cause." Donovan's expression hardened, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Callahan stepped forward. "We don't need your permission if we have probable cause." "But you don't," Maya insisted, her tone firm but respectful. "I have no weapon. There's nothing suspicious about walking home with groceries." Donovan's impatience flared. "I said we got a report matching your description." He reached for her arm. At that moment, Maya felt a surge of panic. She had always believed in the justice system, but she also knew how easily an ordinary situation could spiral out of control. "Please, I'm a Harvard student," she said quickly, fumbling for her student ID in her coat pocket. "My name is Maya Brooks. This has to be a misunderstanding." Her mention of Harvard, instead of diffusing the tension, seemed to irritate Donovan. "So you're one of those fancy college girls, huh? Think you're above the law?" he snarled. Before she could respond, Callahan grabbed her wrists, twisting them behind her back. Pain shot through her shoulders. Maya let out a small cry, half in shock, half in fear. With her arms pinned, her groceries tumbled to the ground, eggs cracking on the sidewalk, milk leaking in a white trail across the slush-laden pavement. "You're hurting me," she gasped. "Not resisting, are you?" Callahan said, applying more pressure. She shook her head frantically. "No." In seconds, cold metal cuffs encircled her wrists, biting into her skin. Maya stood there shivering, her dignity crumbling by the second as the officers rifled through her grocery bags. Donovan poked at each item suspiciously, as if half expecting to find contraband hidden among the cartons. Finding nothing, he grimaced at her. "Okay, Miss Harvard, let's see what the folks at the station have to say." She tried to stay calm, but tears formed in her eyes. "I haven't done anything. This is wrong. I know my rights." Donovan ignored her, stepping back to radio dispatch. Callahan held her firmly by the elbow, as if she were some dangerous criminal. Passers-by, scarce as they were, slowed their steps to watch the scene. Maya felt a wash of shame and helplessness. Time dragged as Donovan muttered into his radio. Maya could only catch parts of the conversation. Words like suspect female and complaint drifted through the freezing air, each one hammering home the absurd reality of what was happening. She was not a suspect in any legitimate sense, yet here she was, bound and humiliated on a Cambridge sidewalk. Moments later, Donovan returned, exchanging a look with Callahan. Without a word, he grabbed Maya's shoulder, marching her to the waiting patrol car. She stumbled in her attempts to keep her footing on the icy ground. "Please be careful," she pleaded, but it made no difference. The car door was opened, and she was pushed inside. As the vehicle pulled away, Maya realized that her life had just taken a sudden, devastating turn. She had believed in the law. She had believed in reason, in justice. But the fear coursing through her veins told her that she was about to learn how fragile those beliefs could be when faced with power wielded by those who bent the rules. At the station, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare on every surface. Maya was led through a corridor to a small interrogation room. The walls were painted a dull gray. She tried to keep her composure. Her wrists still throbbed from the tight cuffs, and her fingers felt numb from the cold. Donovan and Callahan stood on opposite sides of the table, arms crossed, staring at her as though they had just hauled in a notorious criminal. "Let's make this easy," Donovan said, taking a seat across from her. "Who gave you the gun, and what were you planning to do with it?" Maya stared back, stupefied. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I never had a gun. You searched me. I bought groceries, milk, eggs, bread. You have the receipts. You have everything." Callahan rolled his eyes. "We have a reliable tip that someone matching your description was seen brandishing a weapon near the grocery store." She tried to keep her voice steady, though fear churned in her stomach. "That tip is wrong. I'm telling you. I'm a student at Harvard. I was studying, then I went to get groceries. You found nothing on me. How can you charge me with anything?" They exchanged a glance. Donovan leaned forward, lacing his fingers. "We can hold you until we verify your identity, check for outstanding warrants, and complete the paperwork. If our witness insists you're the one, we've got probable cause to proceed." Maya's heart pounded. "But this is insane. I don't have a record. I've never even gotten a traffic ticket. You're making a mistake. Let me call someone, my friends, my family. Just let me make one phone call." Callahan picked up a phone on the table, placing it out of her reach. "You'll get your phone call when we're ready. Until then, we need your statement, and I'd suggest you think carefully about lying." Maya's temper flared. She remembered her constitutional law classes, Miranda rights, the right to an attorney, the right to remain silent. But she also knew how critical it was to at least explain herself. Taking a deep breath, she recounted everything step by step, finishing the study session, walking to the store, buying groceries, seeing the patrol car, being stopped and searched, and the lack of any weapon. Her pleas seemed to fall on deaf ears. Donovan scribbled notes, occasionally glancing at her with a cynical smirk. Callahan just shook his head, tapping his foot restlessly. After finishing, Maya looked at them expectantly, waiting for some sign of reason. Instead, Donovan stood, stretching his arms. "All right, wait here," he said curtly, stepping out with Callahan. The door slammed shut behind them. The isolation felt suffocating. Maya tapped her feet on the worn linoleum floor. The temperature of the room felt unbearably warm compared to the freezing outside. She wanted to scream, to protest, to demand a lawyer, but fear held her in check. She'd never been arrested before. She had no idea how to navigate this in real time, outside of textbooks and moot courts. The minutes blurred into an hour. Then the door swung open, and another officer entered, a woman this time, wearing a grave expression. "I'm Officer Romero. I'll be taking over your intake," she said, turning on a recorder. "We have a witness who claims you threatened them near the grocery store tonight with a firearm. Are you aware of this complaint?" Maya's jaw dropped. "Threaten them? That's not possible. I never threatened anybody. I never even spoke to anyone while I was out." Officer Romero nodded stiffly, as though she'd heard such protests countless times. "You'll be formally charged with the illegal possession of a firearm and making criminal threats. You'll see a judge in the morning." Maya felt her stomach twist in knots. Her mind reeled. "But I'm innocent. You have no evidence. There is no gun. Why won't anyone listen?" Romero placed a file on the table. "There's a statement from a civilian who claims you accosted him in the parking lot, brandished a firearm, and made threats. We have your description: short black hair, about 5'6", wearing a dark coat, carrying a store bag. Matches you fairly well." Tears threatened to rise. "It matches 1,000 people, I'm sure. And it's not true. This is unbelievable." Romero shrugged. "Look, I just do the intake. Take it up with your public defender. Sign here." She pushed a paper forward. Maya read it, a form acknowledging her arrest and the charges. Her hand trembled as she signed. She wanted legal counsel, but she was all alone, stuck in a system that had just branded her a criminal. After that, the next few hours were a haze. She was taken to a holding cell, a drab, cramped space with a hard bench along one wall. The overhead light hummed monotonously. She was fingerprinted, photographed, her mug shot taken while her eyes brimmed with tears of anger and humiliation. After the booking process, she tried to call her parents, but they didn't pick up. It was late, and they were likely asleep. She left a hurried message, her voice quivering. "Mom, Dad, I've been arrested, wrongfully arrested. I need help. Call me as soon as you get this." She also managed to contact her roommate Priya, who answered in a groggy panic. "Oh my God, Maya. Are you okay? What do we do?" "I'm not okay," Maya said, her voice cracking. "I need a lawyer, and can you inform Harvard's Office of Student Services? Maybe they can help me post bail, or—" A guard barked at her to end the call. She whispered, "Please help," before the line went dead. Moments later, the guard escorted her back to the cell and slammed the door shut. Anxiety gripped her chest. She sank onto the hard bench, wrapping her arms around herself to ward off the chill. The humiliating reality set in. She was locked in a jail cell, falsely accused of a crime that could ruin her future and everything she had worked for. Harvard had strict policies on criminal charges, and even if she fought them, the stigma alone could derail her plans for law school, for public service, for everything. A swirl of questions circled her mind. Who filed this complaint? Why would they lie about seeing a gun? Was it a random setup or something more sinister? She thought of the ways her presence as a black woman might have threatened someone's biases, how a simple trip to the grocery store turned into a nightmarish scenario of prejudice and fear. But she also wondered if there was something deeper at play, some conspiracy or malicious motive. At last, exhaustion overcame her adrenaline. She laid down on the bench, hugging herself. She tried to conjure hopeful images. Graduation day, her family cheering her on, the bright future she'd always dreamed of. But they were overshadowed by the gray gloom of her new reality. Tears slid silently down her cheeks, her heart pounding with dread for what the morning would bring. The next day, a sense of dread hardened in her chest as she stood in a beige jumpsuit before a dour-faced judge in Cambridge District Court. The prosecutor rattled off the charges: illegal possession of a firearm, brandishing a firearm in public, making terroristic threats, disturbing the peace. Each word felt like a punch in the gut. Her appointed public defender, overwhelmed with a heavy caseload, tried to argue there was no evidence except a single witness statement. The judge, glancing briefly at the file, set bail at an amount Maya couldn't easily afford. She almost collapsed from shock. The clang of the gavel ended the brief hearing. Maya was led away, tears welling anew. That was when she saw Priya and Marcus in the back of the courtroom, their eyes wide, hands clasped over their mouths. She managed to mouth, "Help me," before the bailiffs pushed her through the side door. That night, she sat in a holding cell, uncertain of whether she'd be released on bail. The injustice burned through her. She was innocent, yet the system seemed determined to prosecute her. She had no clue that the hardest part was yet to come. Forces beyond her understanding were at work, twisting facts and threatening to crush her beneath the grinding machinery of a flawed justice system. By the following afternoon, word had spread around campus. Social media lit up with hashtags like Free Maya Brooks and Justice for Maya. Friends, classmates, and even a few professors clamored for her release, accusing the Cambridge police of racial profiling and wrongful arrest. A small protest group gathered in front of the station, carrying signs that read, "Stop criminalizing black women," and "Harvard stands with Maya." Local reporters caught wind of the story, and soon a few cameras rolled, capturing the outcry. Amid the growing chaos, Maya's roommates, Priya and Lauren, took charge. Priya used her connections with the Harvard Crimson to arrange an interview with the paper's editors. She shared Maya's story, urging them to investigate the circumstances. Meanwhile, Lauren reached out to the Harvard Office of Student Services, advocating for university intervention. The administration took a measured stance at first, issuing a brief statement calling for a fair legal process. But many on campus felt their response was tepid, pointing out that if it had been a high-profile athlete or the child of a major donor, the reaction would have been far swifter and louder. Still, through the combined efforts of friends and sympathetic faculty members, enough donations and pledges trickled in to cover Maya's bail. 3 agonizing days after her arrest, she was finally released, stepping out of the station with the sun glaring in her eyes and a swirl of cameras in her face. She shielded her view, feeling an odd mix of relief and shame. Marcus was there to meet her at the station steps, coat in hand. He gently draped it over her shoulders and guided her through the throng of reporters. "No comment," he snapped when someone shoved a microphone in Maya's face. They found a taxi around the corner. Inside, Maya collapsed against the seat, exhaustion etched into her features. She'd barely slept in the holding cell. Her mind spun with conflicting emotions, gratitude for her release, humiliation from the arrest, and a burning anger at the injustice of it all. In the days that followed, her small off-campus apartment turned into a de facto legal war room. Marcus, Priya, and Lauren combed through every detail of her arrest, searching for clues. The public defender assigned to her was an overworked attorney named Mark Fleming. Mark seemed sympathetic but admitted he had a mountain of cases. Still, he pledged to do his best. Maya quickly realized that doing his best wouldn't be enough. She needed a robust legal strategy, not just a tired public defender spread too thin. Her parents, desperate to help, started looking for a private lawyer in Boston. They discovered a small but dedicated legal clinic run by an alumnus of Harvard Law School, a sharp civil rights attorney named Elliot Carter. Elliot was well known for tackling police misconduct cases and had won several high-profile suits over unconstitutional arrests and excessive force. For Maya, Elliot seemed like a godsend, except for the cost. Skilled representation was expensive. Yet, when Elliot heard the details of Maya's case, he agreed to take it at a reduced rate. "I won't let an innocent young woman's life be ruined," he told them during an initial meeting at his modest office in downtown Boston. He had a quiet intensity about him, and his gaze bore the lines of countless courtroom battles. "We'll get to the bottom of this. I've seen too many false charges based on flimsy witness statements. There's more here than meets the eye." Over the next week, Elliot and Maya worked tirelessly. They tracked down security footage from the grocery store on the night of the incident. The footage showed Maya clearly walking in and out of the store with no interaction whatsoever with any other customer, let alone a confrontation. The manager was cooperative, providing a time-stamped recording that showed Maya from multiple angles. "This is gold," Elliot said, reviewing the video on his laptop with a triumphant smile. "It proves no altercation happened inside, but the supposed incident took place in the parking lot, so we need more footage." Unfortunately, the parking lot cameras were old and had limited coverage. The angle that would have captured Maya's exit was apparently obstructed or non-functional. They could only see her for a couple of seconds as she emerged from the store, then she slipped out of frame. Even so, the short clip undermined the claim that she appeared menacing or threatened someone. She looked calm, checking her phone before heading off. The store's timestamps also aligned with her receipt, confirming she left at 11:47 p.m. That matched precisely the time she told the police. Hard evidence, however, needed to be even more conclusive for the prosecution to drop the charges. Right now, all they had was a partial exoneration. To complicate matters, the prosecution claimed to have a key witness, a middle-aged man named Carl Peters. He had come forward with the initial report of a woman with a gun. According to the police records, Peters insisted he saw Maya brandishing a small handgun and muttering threats about retribution while in the grocery store parking lot. He claimed he ran back to his car, dialed 911, and watched from a distance as the woman left. He gave the dispatcher a description, which police used to locate Maya minutes later on the street. "He's lying," Maya fumed, reviewing the transcripts in Elliot's office. "He says I threatened him? I never even saw this guy." Elliot nodded solemnly. "I suspect he is, but we need to prove it." Days turned into weeks as Elliot filed motions to have the charges dismissed. The court scheduled a preliminary hearing to determine if the case would proceed to trial. Meanwhile, the Cambridge Police Department doubled down, insisting they had sufficient cause to stop and arrest Maya. They pointed to the matching description from the 911 call, the witness statement, and the alleged suspicious behavior she exhibited when the officers approached. Throughout this ordeal, Maya struggled to keep up with her academics. Harvard's semester turned on, with midterms looming. Her professors tried to be supportive, but she found it nearly impossible to concentrate on her readings or problem sets. Nightmares plagued her sleep. She would wake in cold sweats, recalling the snap of handcuffs around her wrists. She felt judged, whether it was real or imagined. In the campus cafeteria, some curious gazes followed her, as if wondering if the rumors were true or not. A group of her supporters was vocal, organizing small rallies and handing out flyers proclaiming her innocence. Yet she couldn't shake the queasy feeling that her name was forever tarnished. Then a strange phone call changed the trajectory of the entire case. One Wednesday afternoon, Maya sat in Elliot's office, going over possible defense strategies, when the receptionist buzzed in. "There's a man on the line calling about Miss Brooks's case. Says he has some information." Elliot gestured for Maya to pick up the extension. She answered cautiously. "Hello? This is Maya." A raspy male voice responded. "I know you got set up. That Carl Peters guy, he's lying, and I can prove it. But I need protection. He's not acting alone. There's some kind of arrangement with those cops who arrested you." Maya's breath hitched. She put the phone on speaker so Elliot could hear. "Who is this?" she asked, voice trembling. "I can't say," the voice whispered. "All I can tell you is that this goes deeper than you think. The police got a call, but it wasn't random. Peters was put up to it, and there's a payoff involved. I saw things. I'm not safe. I'll call back." The line went dead. Maya stared at Elliot, her pulse hammering. Elliot pursed his lips. This might be a prank call, or it might be a whistleblower who has proof of some serious police corruption. Maya swallowed. "Corruption? You think so?" Elliot frowned thoughtfully. "Police misconduct is one thing, but staging a false witness, that's next level. If this is true, it could blow the case wide open." They decided to document the phone call. Elliot immediately reached out to his legal contacts, trying to figure out if there were any known investigations into Cambridge police corruption. To his surprise, he heard rumors that there might be ongoing federal probes in the area. Nothing was confirmed, but the mere whisper of it was enough to suggest Maya's arrest could be part of a larger scheme, maybe involving forging arrests to boost certain officers' records, or, worse yet, a scapegoat for some departmental fiasco. As the preliminary hearing date loomed closer, tension and speculation rose. Maya found a renewed sense of determination, buoyed by the possibility that the real truth could come to light. For the first time since her arrest, she felt there might be a path to vindication. Little did she know that her case was about to attract the attention of an unexpected ally with the power to truly turn the tables. The morning of the preliminary hearing arrived with a crisp late winter chill in the air. Maya woke up before dawn, her heart pounding. She dressed in her best professional outfit, a charcoal gray suit and a modest blouse. She looked at herself in the mirror, noticing the fatigue around her eyes, the lingering anxiety in her expression. Steeling herself, she whispered, "You're innocent. You have nothing to fear." But fear was there, gnawing at her all the same. At the courthouse, Elliot guided her through the winding corridors. Reporters and onlookers hovered in the halls, hoping for a glimpse of the Harvard student on trial. The tension was palpable. Priya, Marcus, and Lauren stood behind a roped-off area, offering silent moral support. Maya managed a small smile in their direction. Inside the courtroom, the judge presiding over the hearing was the Honorable Judge Isabella Garcia, a stern woman known for her no-nonsense approach. The prosecutor, a wiry man named Paul Stevens, looked confident, placing his folders neatly on the table. Officer Donovan was there, wearing his uniform, along with Callahan, both looking unflappable in the face of the swirling accusations of misconduct. Carl Peters sat in the front row of the gallery, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth whenever he glanced at Maya. The hearing commenced with the prosecution presenting their evidence. Stevens recounted the alleged events: an unidentified gun, a threat, a 911 call, and a description matching Maya. He introduced Peters as the main witness. Maya clenched her fists under the table. She felt Elliot place a calming hand on her arm, a silent message to stay composed. Peters took the stand, swearing to tell the truth in a flat, practiced tone. He repeated the story he'd given to the police. He said he'd seen Maya in the parking lot. She allegedly approached him, lifted her coat to show a concealed firearm, and threatened him, saying something about payback. He recounted how he feared for his life and dialed 911 as soon as she walked away. Maya could barely contain her outrage, but she held her tongue, remembering Elliot's admonitions. When Elliot cross-examined Peters, he highlighted discrepancies between Peters' statement and the grocery store security footage. "You claim Miss Brooks confronted you after purchasing her groceries?" Elliot said, letting each word hang. However, camera footage shows her leaving at 11:47 p.m., and there's no sign of her interacting with anyone, let alone making threats. "Can you explain that?" Peters shifted, avoiding eye contact. "The camera angle doesn't show the parking lot," he stammered. "She threatened me out there, not inside. You can't see everything on those tapes." Elliot pressed on. "Were there any other witnesses in the parking lot? Did you call out for help? Did anyone see you in distress?" Peters licked his lips. It all happened so fast. No one else was around. I just got in my car and left." Elliot moved in for the kill. "I see. So we have only your word that this happened, and no physical evidence. No weapon was ever recovered. No traces of wrongdoing. And the security footage contradicts your story. Are you sure you're not mistaken, Mr. Peters?" A glimmer of fear passed over Peters' features, but he held firm. "I'm not mistaken. She's the one who did it. I'm certain." The hearing recessed for lunch. The judge would reconvene in the afternoon to hear Elliot's motion to dismiss for lack of evidence. Maya felt a sliver of hope. Peters' testimony was weak, and Elliot had attacked it effectively. But the burden of proof to move forward with a trial was lower at this preliminary stage. She knew they were not out of the woods yet. While she and Elliot waited in the courthouse cafeteria, Marcus rushed in, excitement evident in his eyes. "Maya, Elliot, you're not going to believe this." Two men in suits just cornered Donovan and Callahan in the hallway. They looked like feds, could be FBI or something. Maya's heart leapt. "Feds? Are you sure?" Marcus nodded. "They flashed badges. I think they said U.S. Marshal Service. They told Donovan and Callahan to come with them." It looked serious. Elliot raised an eyebrow. "U.S. Marshals? That's interesting. We need to see what's going on." They ventured back into the courtroom area, where a small commotion buzzed near a side corridor. Sure enough, two imposing men in dark suits, each wearing a badge on a chain around his neck, were quietly escorting Donovan and Callahan away. Maya could see the confusion on Donovan's face. Callahan looked pale as a ghost. "Hold on," Elliot called, approaching cautiously. "I'm Miss Brooks's attorney. Is there something we should know?" The older marshal, a broad-shouldered man with close-cropped hair, looked Elliot up and down. "Mr. Carter, is it? I'm Deputy Marshal Frank Hayes. We've been conducting an investigation into certain officers for potential corruption, and we'd like to speak with them. We'll be in touch with you as well." With that, they disappeared down the hallway, leaving behind a whirlwind of questions. Maya's mind raced. Could this be related to the phone call from the mysterious whistleblower? It had to be. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Whatever was happening, it appeared the U.S. Marshals had reason to believe that Donovan and Callahan were involved in something illicit. When court resumed that afternoon, Donovan and Callahan were conspicuously absent. The prosecutor tried to proceed, but Elliot seized the moment, pointing out the officer's sudden disappearance and demanding to know the nature of the federal investigation. Judge Garcia agreed that their absence was unusual, to say the least. Stevens, clearly flustered, insisted the case could move forward based on Peters's testimony alone, but the judge was not convinced. She set another hearing date, instructing the prosecution to clarify the status of the arresting officers. Until then, Maya's case was in limbo. Outside the courthouse, a gaggle of reporters pounced, firing questions at Maya, Elliot, and the prosecutor. Elliot raised his voice over the clamor. "My client has maintained her innocence from the start. We have reason to believe the officers acted improperly, and we will pursue every avenue to ensure justice is served." The question on everyone's lips was the same. Why were the U.S. Marshals suddenly interested in this case? In the days that followed, stories began leaking out in bits and pieces. Rumors circulated that Donovan and Callahan had been implicated in a broader probe involving falsified police reports and planted evidence. Whispers arose about illicit ties between certain members of the Cambridge Police Department and small-time criminals, involving payoffs for cleaning up the streets by framing unsuspecting individuals who fit a convenient profile. If these allegations were true, Maya's arrest could have been orchestrated to boost arrest statistics or to provide cover for some other wrongdoing. Federal law enforcement vehicles were spotted outside the Cambridge Police Department several times that week. The local press ran headlines like "Corruption in Cambridge PD" and "Harvard Student's Case Triggers Federal Investigation." City officials scrambled to manage the fallout, issuing statements about full cooperation with the U.S. Marshals and an internal investigation into the matter. During this time, Elliot received a call from Deputy Marshal Frank Hayes. He wanted to meet privately to discuss Maya's arrest. Elliot and Maya arrived at a nondescript federal building in downtown Boston, passing through tight security before being led into a sterile conference room with a large blank wall of frosted glass. Hayes sat at a metal table, flipping through a thick folder. "Thank you for coming," he said, nodding politely to Maya and Elliot. "Miss Brooks, we've been keeping a close eye on your case. We have reason to believe that your arrest was not just a random act of overreach, but part of a pattern of corruption." Maya felt her throat tighten. "So I was framed?" Hayes nodded solemnly. "We suspect so. Donovan and Callahan have been under investigation for a few months now, following some internal complaints. We suspect they worked with paid informants or coerced civilians to fabricate charges against people they believed wouldn't fight back, usually individuals who lacked resources or who the system would automatically judge with suspicion." Anger and relief washed over Maya in tandem. Her voice quavered. "I'm not sure if I'm relieved or furious. So many lives destroyed." Elliot cut in, his expression grim. "Do you have evidence linking Carl Peters to these officers?" "He's the alleged witness." Hayes opened his folder. "Peters is a known informant who's done work for Callahan in the past. We've confirmed multiple payments made to Peters through an off-the-books fund. We don't have a direct link to your case yet, but we strongly suspect Peters was paid or coerced to frame Miss Brooks." Maya's breath caught. This was it, the thread that tied everything together. "So what now?" she asked. Hayes took a moment before responding. "We need your help. We're building a case against them for conspiracy and violation of civil rights under color of law. Miss Brooks's case is central. If you're willing, we can use your testimony and evidence to strengthen our charges. In return, we'll provide all the support we can to ensure your name is cleared. We'd also be open to a civil rights lawsuit that could bring you monetary damages for the harm you've suffered." Maya let out a slow exhale. She had never imagined she'd be at the center of something so big. Elliot glanced at her, then spoke with cautious optimism. "We appreciate your candor, Deputy Marshal. Our priority is to get the charges against Miss Brooks dropped and ensure justice. We'll cooperate with your investigation, but we also expect your office to be fully transparent with us." Hayes nodded. "We will be. But this might get messy. Corruption can run deeper than you think. Donovan and Callahan aren't just rogue cops. They might be part of a network that includes supervisors and city officials. Powerful people may want to keep this quiet." Maya squared her shoulders. "I don't care how powerful they are. I want the truth out. No one else should have to go through what I did." They agreed to share evidence, coordinating closely over the next few weeks. Meanwhile, the local media caught wind of the bigger picture. Federal authorities were actively investigating multiple officers, and Maya Brooks's case was just one example of possible wrongdoing. Pressure mounted on the district attorney's office to reconsider the charges against her. Soon, fresh cracks appeared in the prosecution's case. Peters vanished, failing to show up at his next scheduled interview. Rumors swirled that he'd fled Massachusetts altogether. Without Peters, the prosecution's entire story had no foundation. More damning still, phone records emerged showing multiple calls between Callahan and Peters on the night of Maya's arrest. The data suggested that Callahan might have instructed Peters to place the 911 call precisely when Maya left the grocery store. Faced with mounting evidence of corruption, the district attorney's office reluctantly dropped all charges against Maya Brooks. The official statement cited lack of sufficient evidence to proceed. The words were bland and bureaucratic, but the result was exactly what Maya needed. She was free. She was no longer under a legal cloud. The day the charges were dropped, Maya stood outside the courthouse, flanked by Elliot, Marcus, Priya, and Lauren. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. She took a deep breath and made a brief statement. I want to thank everyone who believed in my innocence and supported me during this nightmare. The system isn't perfect, and in my case, it failed spectacularly. I'm grateful to the U.S. Marshal Service for shining a light on the truth. I'm determined to use this experience to advocate for reforms in policing and criminal justice so no one else suffers what I went through. Thank you. She held her head high, brimming with relief and a fierce resolve. She was no longer a defendant, no longer branded by a false accusation. Yet, as she stepped away from the podium, she realized the next phase of her battle was just beginning. Now came the quest for accountability. With the charges dropped, Maya Brooks resumed her life at Harvard. She was greeted by warm embraces from classmates and heartfelt congratulations from professors. The campus community's outrage at her ordeal had sparked deeper conversations about racial profiling, civil rights, and accountability in law enforcement. The Black Students Association hosted panels where she spoke about her experiences, her voice trembling with a mix of anguish and determination as she recounted the humiliations of her arrest. But even as she tried to settle back into academic life, she remained entangled in the ongoing federal investigation. Deputy Marshal Hayes reached out regularly for updates, and Elliot filed a formal civil rights lawsuit against Donovan, Callahan, and the Cambridge Police Department on Maya's behalf. The suit cited violations of her 4th and 14th Amendment rights, seeking not only financial compensation, but institutional reforms as well. Meanwhile, the U.S. Marshals closed in on Donovan and Callahan. After their initial detention, the officers were suspended from the force. Investigators unearthed evidence of forged documents, falsified arrest reports, and suspicious financial transactions. Their bank records showed unexplained deposits. Text messages hinted at conspiracies with petty criminals like Peters. The weight of the evidence was staggering. Eventually, both officers were indicted on multiple federal counts, including conspiracy to deprive individuals of their civil rights. As the federal case progressed, shocking details emerged in court filings. Donovan and Callahan had run a racket where they paid or extorted vulnerable people, homeless individuals, addicts, small-time offenders, to file false reports against targets. These targets were often minorities or people with limited resources to fight back. The scheme served two purposes. It bolstered Donovan and Callahan's arrest numbers for departmental praise, and it occasionally covered up real crimes they committed or abetted. Anyone who questioned them risked being framed or harassed. It was the smoking gun Elliot needed for Maya's civil case. The moment these revelations hit the media, public opinion turned starkly against the Cambridge Police Department. City officials scrambled to contain the fallout. The police chief resigned under pressure. The mayor promised a sweeping overhaul of police procedures, including mandatory body cameras and independent oversight boards. It was a reckoning long overdue, set into motion by Maya's ordeal. The civil suit advanced, with depositions that forced high-level department officials to admit lapses in oversight and accountability. Maya had to relive her trauma, recounting every detail of her humiliating arrest. But this time she did so with the moral support of a legal team and the knowledge that she was on the right side of history. Elliot showed no mercy to the department's defense attorneys, methodically presenting evidence of corruption and calling witness after witness who attested to Donovan and Callahan's unethical behavior. Eventually, the Cambridge city attorneys approached Elliot with a settlement offer, hoping to avoid a lengthy trial. While the sum was substantial enough to ensure Maya's financial stability for a long time, she didn't see it merely as a windfall. She pushed for structural reforms as part of the settlement, new regulations on how police would be supervised, mandatory reporting of all interactions, and improved diversity training. She demanded that the city fund a scholarship program for underrepresented students pursuing criminal justice or law. If the city wanted to settle, it had to offer not just money, but real change. At first, the city balked at her conditions, but as more scandalous details emerged and public anger swelled, the officials relented. The final settlement was a landmark agreement. Maya would receive a significant monetary sum, and more importantly, the city pledged to implement wide-ranging reforms. They also agreed to fund an annual scholarship at Harvard for minority students in pre-law or criminal justice studies, named in honor of Maya's resilience. Around the same time, Donovan and Callahan went to trial. They stared across the courtroom at Maya with resentment etched in their features. But it was no longer a stare of intimidation. It was a stare of defeated men who'd been caught. The jury deliberated for only a day before finding them guilty of multiple charges. When the judge pronounced their sentences, each facing years in federal prison, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. Maya felt a grim satisfaction. This was hard karma, the universe's scales tipping back towards some measure of justice. In the months that followed, life gradually returned to a semblance of normal for Maya Brooks. She poured her energies into her final year at Harvard, determined not to let the trauma derail her future. The media spotlight on her case began to wane as new headlines emerged, but the lasting impact on the city of Cambridge and the local justice system remained. The scholarship program the city funded became a beacon of hope for many aspiring young students from marginalized communities. Named the Brooks Scholarship for Justice and Reform, it provided financial support and mentorship for those who hoped to fight for legal and social change. Every time Maya saw a flyer or read a university bulletin about the scholarship, she felt a surge of pride. She had turned her darkest experience into an avenue for others to find light. Her personal settlement money was enough for Maya to cover her remaining tuition and set up a small foundation that supported criminal justice reform initiatives. She partnered with community organizations in Boston and Atlanta, offering grants and educational workshops on civil rights. She also gave guest lectures at Harvard Law School, sharing her firsthand account of systemic failures and the importance of legal checks on police power. She refused to become solely a victim in the narrative. She was determined to be a catalyst for change. Graduation day finally arrived. As she donned her cap and gown, she remembered the terrified girl she'd been that cold February night, handcuffed on the sidewalk, groceries spilled, dreams teetering on the brink. Now she stood on the threshold of a bright future she had nearly lost. Her parents, beaming with pride, hugged her tight, tears streaming down her mother's face. Priya, Marcus, Lauren, and a host of other friends cheered wildly as her name was called. Harvard's historic yard echoed with applause when she stepped onto the stage to receive her diploma. In her commencement speech, an honor she'd been asked to give after the university recognized her courage, Maya spoke passionately about resilience, justice, and the power of collective action. She recalled the pain of her false arrest, but emphasized how the Harvard community and beyond had rallied to support her. She urged her fellow graduates to challenge injustice wherever they found it, to use their education for the betterment of society. Looking out at the sea of faces, she thought of the many people who had helped her along the way. Elliot Carter, Deputy Marshal Hayes, her unwavering friends, professors who provided references and emotional support, activists who marched for her freedom, and even the countless strangers who shared her story online. All of them contributed to her vindication. After the ceremony, she posed for photos at the John Harvard statue, this time with a different sense of wonder. She knew the world she was about to enter was flawed. She knew the justice system was not always just. But she also knew that individuals armed with truth and determination could shake even the most entrenched power structures. Several years later, news outlets in Boston ran a story about a bright new legal mind making waves in the Massachusetts State House. The headline read, "Maya Brooks, Harvard graduate and civil rights activist, announces state Senate run." The accompanying article detailed her strong track record in advocacy, her community outreach programs, and her legal scholarship on police accountability. She had passed the bar exam with flying colors and worked briefly as a public defender, using her experiences to guide her practice. During her announcement speech, she stood at a podium outside the Massachusetts State House, flanked by supporters and local dignitaries. She spoke of a vision for a fair and compassionate justice system, for opportunity and equity, for a world where no one lived in fear of wrongful arrest. Cameras flashed. Applause rang out. In the crowd, Elliot Carter watched proudly, remembering the frightened young woman he had first met in his office, determined to prove her innocence. Donovan and Callahan were still behind bars, their appeals denied. Rumors circulated they remained bitter, blaming everyone but themselves for their downfall. The Cambridge Police Department had undergone a wave of reforms, with new leadership committed to rebuilding public trust. The U.S. Marshals wrapped up their broader corruption probe, which led to disciplinary actions against several other officers. While some corners of the department still resisted change, progress was tangible, rooted in the lessons of Maya's case. Each year, the Brooks Scholarship for Justice and Reform selected new recipients. Some pursued law degrees, others focused on social work or public policy. All of them carried the spirit of Maya's fight, determined to ensure that the law served all equally. Occasionally, Maya attended scholarship dinners and met the bright-eyed young men and women who benefited from the fund she had helped create. Seeing them dream big dreams reminded her of how close she had come to losing her own. And so life continued. Hard karma had indeed hit back. The corrupt cops faced the consequences of their actions, the city government was forced into reforms, and a young black woman who had once been humiliated on a frozen sidewalk emerged as a powerful voice for justice. The experience had tested everything Maya believed in, her faith in the system, her resolve to succeed, and her hope for a better world. Ultimately, it strengthened her convictions and placed her on a path she might not have chosen otherwise, but one that proved to be her true calling. Late at night in her modest Boston apartment, sometimes Maya would think back to those harrowing hours in a holding cell. She would remember the frigid sidewalk, the cracking eggs, the sting of the cuffs around her wrists. She would feel the echo of despair that had threatened to crush her spirit. But then she would think of the thousands of faces that had stood by her, the unstoppable momentum of justice when fueled by truth, and the promise she had made to herself. Never give up, never forget, and never stop fighting for what is right. Those memories lit a fire in her heart, a fire that guided her forward, beyond the courtrooms, beyond the graduation stage, and toward a future in which, even if the law was imperfect, it could be challenged, reformed, and sometimes even redeemed by those bold enough to stand against injustice. Justice was served, but the fight is far from over. Maya Brooks didn't just clear her name. She exposed corruption, changed policies, and proved that one voice can make a difference. What happened to her could happen to anyone, but she refused to stay silent. She turned her pain into power, her struggle into strength, and her story into a movement for change. But here's the truth. Injustice still exists, corruption still thrives, and voices like Maya's are needed more than ever. If this story moved you, if you believe in standing up against wrongdoing, then join us. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay with us for more eye-opening stories. Because the fight for justice never stops, and neither should we.